All right, here is my vlog for the month of November. In a text, I'm just gonna recap three from what would be week 13. Three readings, I should say. So the first one I actually want to talk about is the ethics and multiculturalism, advancing cultural and clinical responsiveness, and it pertains a little bit about it pertains to a little bit about what I was discussing in my video earlier today about the new Jim Crow. So what I took from this reading specifically was that because we're not putting multiculturalism and being culturally humble at the forefront of our practice, we are further perpetuating these dilemmas within our practice and within our field. Um, I thought that was a super interesting article and how it framed specifically one situation talking about a Mexican American who's having relational issues in that relationship and wanted to come in and do um, like a prayer, a religious act that would help break the not break the but help foster growth in an atmosphere for growth within that counseling session. And one of the points that the authors brought up was who's the professional, who decides what dilemma gets what type of treatment or intervention, and how being culturally responsive and humble can help foster atmospheres where that would be not only acceptable but encouraged and then prove to be beneficial. A couple other things from that article. Um, Obviously, literature has increased in the last 2 decades, but there's a lack of movement for getting all of this writing into action and into practice. So I thought that was a very interesting read. The second one I want to talk about is the state of LGBTQ affirmative therapy clinical research. So a mixed methods systemic synthesis. Couple points that I thought were super interesting was that for the youth, bringing in role models, positive role models, helped increase the collective and the individualistic self-esteem. Um, I think that can be applied across anything. The old adage, birds of a feather flock together. When you bring in positive examples of whatever you're trying to push, in this case, it's LGBTQ and it's a positive self esteem, bringing in examples so especially youth can see it. I think that is mightily impactful because obviously there's a huge differential of power between youth and adults, and seeing an adult that you can identify with is vitally important, I think, for self-esteem. um, One of the other ones I thought was interesting was the study that implemented an adapted version of cognitive behavioral therapy for the LGB community. Um, that there was a significant, and this was a group therapy as well, which I think those are two compounding issues there. So adapting for appropriateness for your group and it being a group in and of itself. Research has suggested that group therapy is more impactful and more profound, than just individual therapy. So those compounding of changing, adapting, and making it a group um, created a significant decrease in depression. Um, that being said, it also said in that specific study that there was no change for internalized homophobia, but in the acceptance and commitment therapy um, research project, there there were lower levels of internalized homophobia. Um, so I'm wondering where where the differences lie there with acceptance and commitment theory or therapy, excuse me, and then adapted CBT group therapy, where the discrepancies were how one group did lower their levels of internalized homophobia, and that LGBT adaptive CBT group did not. So I thought that was interesting, and I'd like to. I don't think I missed it. Well, I know I didn't miss the those talking points within the article, so I'm just wondering where they differ. And then the last one I'd like to talk about is the relational. Um, no, excuse me. Yeah, yeah, the relational cultural theory, a framework for bridging relational, multicultural, and social justice competencies. Jeez, this is rough right now. Um, it this one seemed to be a lot of repeat information, I would say, for the most part. That being said, one impactful point I really took from this was how RCT implements a mutual empathy component um, to their approach. And the definition is, I mean, it's self-explanatory, right? The empathy is mutual from client and clinician. Um, but as I was thinking about it and reflecting on it, I thought there is a power differential. Tom McQueen mentioned it's a pseudo intimate relationship, so it's one sided, and I just couldn't help but think how as as a success coach, I do my best to eliminate the power differential when I'm working with students. And I do that so they don't just view me as another school official. And not to say that we're best friends, right? That we're going to go ride bikes and get ice cream together when the school day is done, right? Because that's not it. But how I feel it is important that they realize that I am just there to help. Um, and try to develop um, a mutual understanding and hey, like you come to me with anything that I can help out with, and we are going to get this thing done together. And when that has been, um, when it has been strong, I guess I would say, when those relationships have been strong, there is progress. Doesn't always last, but there is progress. So I thought that that mutual empathy part was super important to highlight. And then not only that, but the other side of that coin, um, for those who have relational issues, um, hurdles, struggles, um, that relational awareness that this article talked about. So being aware of how relationships move through different stages. I thought that was super interesting. But then the relational paradox is what I really would like to touch on here. When I was working with um, low socioeconomic students, one thing that I routinely saw with a couple of the students on my caseload was that it would seem that they would sabotage themselves. They would make progress. They would make progress for weeks, and then would move to a month, and then 2 months. And then it's right about this time when the holidays started to come around, they would just tank. They would start to act up in class again. They would start to use harsh language with me. And it's I'm not sure what it is. I didn't leave. I didn't abandon them like the paradox would suggest, that that's what they've experienced. So when they make progress, when they get close, when they have these senses of vulnerability, essentially, then I don't want to say self-destruct, but they intentionally try to sabotage themselves in the relationships that expose them, for lack of a better term. And I just think that, as clinicians and as, support staffs in schools, we just continue to show that unconditional positive regard to reassure them that we aren't going to abandon them or hurt them when they're most vulnerable. So I thought that was a really, really interesting component. Sorry, being mindful of time, running up on 12 minutes here. Our IGD group, last week we discussed voucher programs, not to make it political, but it always seems that it's either political or it's racial, and it involves money to some capacity. Talked about how voucher programs, the ones who consistently push for it, tend to be Republicans, and it's an undermining of the public school system, and it essentially would create a cyclical funding of politicians and schools. There was no conflict. Our group has been just really solid all year long. We've been together. 5 of us have been together since January. London joining the group. It's like she's been with us since January. So not much conflict. The challenging conversations have been mostly those revolved around racial tensions. Obviously, 2020 is textbook for race relations in this country. And it's been challenging, not that anyone has felt I don't want to say out of place, but it's been a safe space for us to have these conversations and for people to say what's on their mind, and not feel threatened by feedback. So it's been a really, really good group. We continue to, speak with one another. We continue to listen with one another. We continue to grow and gain knowledge from one another. It's a really good group, and I'm very thankful that this is the group that I'm in. Sorry, 14 minutes. I'm so sorry. Thank you very much.